How do we equip our families with a biblical worldview? How do we prepare the next generation for life? How do I grow in my walk with the Lord and in my marriage? If you wrestle with these questions, you are in the right place to find answers. Welcome to the Entrusting the Faith podcast. Welcome to the Entrusting the Faith podcast. I'm your host, Eric Rutherford, and today our guest is Doug Smith. Doug is the author of Unintentional: How Screens Secretly Shape Your Desires and How You Can Break Free. He's also a conference speaker, father, husband, and Christ follower. But before we start our interview, this episode is brought to you by my book, Leading Well at Home: How Husbands and Fathers Can Biblically Lead Their Families. So have you ever thought, I want to be a godly husband or father, but I don't know where to start? Have you ever heard that you need to do something to equip your family, but didn't know how to begin? Well, if so, Leading Well at Home will show you how you can love Jesus Christ, love and serve your wife and children, and take responsibility for discipling your family. You'll be encouraged and given action steps that you can apply so that you're moving forward. You can buy it online through our website at entrustingthefaith.com or leadingwellathome.com or anywhere books are sold online. You can also get a free excerpt on our website. All that information is in the show notes, so you can check it out. So now let's jump into today's interview. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you so much for having me. Grateful to be here.
Oh, it is my pleasure, and I know our audience will be excited as well. I mentioned the book, so can you give us a little bit of an overview of Unintentional? Just kind of a big picture view of the book.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's no surprise to anyone that screens are a huge deal in our culture. We're inundated by devices, and often they cause conflicts in our families. They cause conflicts in all kinds of ways, which we can get into. But the reason the book is called Unintentional is that most people unintentionally use their devices. The average person ends up spending, depending on the study, 6 to 12 hours a day consuming digital media. So we didn't sign up necessarily. We didn't intentionally say, when I grow up, I want to give all my data to the biggest corporations in the world. We didn't sign up for that. So we're unintentionally doing that. Why are we doing that? Because the industry is very intentional in the way that they make their content habit forming, obsession forming, and literally addictive. So the book goes through this arc that teaches us how the industry does this. Like I say, it's how they secretly shape our desires. They're literally changing what we want through technology. And then but the most of the book is just a grace-filled application then of really what are classic spiritual disciplines, but they're applied to our relationship with technology. So they help Christians live intentionally, what I call flipping the intentionality and balance, so that we become more intentional with our lives than the biggest corporations in the world are.
That is hugely important. I don't even know if that's the right phrase, hugely important. That may not be grammatically correct, but that's how it feels.
Works for me.
And I'm going to touch on a couple of those points in a minute, because as I read the book, I remember reading it with just my mouth hanging open, in some of that stuff. So kind of let's back up a few steps. What led up to you writing it? And was there like this aha moment where you're like, oh my word, I have got to get this written down? Did it happen over time? So what was the lead up to it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, as you mentioned, I'm a husband, I'm a dad to 4 grown daughters. So I have that perspective. I'm also a lifelong software developer. That's what I do for my day job. And then I've also been a Bible student for most of my adult life. So those 3 things kind of converged. And as I watched us grow up with, it's hard to remember, but smartphones came out only like in 2007. So they haven't been there forever. It feels like it, only 14 years, I guess now. So watching that happen and watching the effect on myself and watching the effect on my family and friends and people around us, I'd started to feel this burden, and I understood, because of my software development background, I understood there was something going on. And I knew that I had some things that I wanted to learn more about and then share I wanted to help people with what I had learned. I had overcome several things in my life, and I wanted to help people understand that. But there was kind of an aha moment around 2014 where I really felt called. I felt a significant calling. Like, Doug, you've got to not only do something about this for your family, but you need to share this. I just felt that my heart broke as I watched. I kind of felt this this sense from God that people don't realize that the industry is just wrapping chains around them. They're becoming ensnared in ways. They're being held back. They can't even think for themselves. They're losing our ability to think clearly. So it just really broke my heart. And I ended up taking steps I ended up in 2016 then left a full-time job and took jobs as a contractor to pay the bills while I really focused on writing the book over about a 2.5-year period. Wow. So because it was a very much, as you read it, it's got 179 footnotes because it was a research project. I had to, as people were evaluating the book, they were saying, well, who's doing that? And how do you know? And like, okay, well, here you go. So it's got all the research that shows what's going on and why. It makes some big claims, but it backs it up with data. So that took a lot of time. And as a result, I was able to make that case, I think, pretty clearly.
Wow. I was blown away by the amount of information in the book. And, really, some of the claims that were being made really were kind of like, it was a paradigm shift for me as I was reading through. I'm like, oh my word. And so just for the audience, if they have not read it, what are one or two things that, screen usage what's it doing to us that we are either unaware of or unprepared for, just as it sneaks in?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think first of all, the general principle that people don't realize that the reason everybody's on their screens all the time is that they're designed to be addictive. The biggest companies, talking about, Facebook, Google, Apple, all the big guys, they hire top neuroscientists, top behavioral psychologists, and they do thousands of experiments on us using the most sophisticated technology the world's ever known to learn what works on us. And they write books on the subject. As you saw in my book, I cite a book. There's a book called Hooked, which teaches companies how to hook people. There's a book called Evil by Design, which has like 57 different ways to exploit people's through technology, through what's on your screen. And that book is particularly interesting because it's patterned after the classic 7 deadly sins. So they exploit our tendency to go for greed or lust or sloth or whatever. And they just teach how to do that. So this is really a thing. So like, for example, one of the things that happens over time, one of the things that happens in many applications is they're never done. This happens both in social media and in modern video games. There's no way to finish. You never get to the end of your Facebook feed. You never get to the end of the video game. Netflix added autoplay because you'll never get done with Netflix. It'll just always have another thing, and it'll know what you usually, and if you stop tonight, tomorrow night, it'll make a better suggestion and you won't stop then. So it's on and on and on. So it's countless things like that. One psychologist that I know evaluated one of the popular video games, Fortnite. There's 200 specific psychological exploits in Fortnite. So when your child is angry because you make them get off, it's because they have a psychological withdrawal. They're being pulled away by 200 psychological exploits that make them want to keep playing. So all that to say, the battle that we're in is real. It's significant. It's exploitative. And frankly, it just makes me angry every time I think about it. So that's why I wrote it. It's like, nobody likes to be manipulated. Nobody likes to be lied to or all that. So it's just, I feel like people need to know that and need to be able to take their life back.
No, and that's a really good point. The more I got to thinking, my day job is in marketing. And over the last year, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts, doing a lot of reading, a little research on social platforms and, how, people can put material on there, how to make it stick. And one of the things that is constantly out there is, YouTube is designed to keep you on platform.
Mm-hmm.
Facebook is designed to keep you on platform.
That's right.
And so if you're posting anything out there, as long as you help keep people on platform, they will reward you for that by, putting you up the search feature,
Mm-hmm.
which I
Mm-hmm.
found fascinating, especially as I'm reading, your material.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. Because if, as a user, as a consumer of these platforms, they're all free. But the reason that they're free is because we are the product. We are not the customer. Their customer are the advertisers that pay them, and the shareholders of the big companies that pay them to make a lot of money. And they're really, really good at making tons and tons of money, obviously. So they do that on our backs. They do that because they sell us. And the way they sell us, what do they sell about us? They sell our attention, they sell our time, they sell our likelihood to take actions that they want us to take, our likelihood to keep scrolling until we see a certain ad a certain number of times, and then we do take it, or a certain number of videos we watch. So yeah, that's why I say it's desire shaping. What we want is literally being changed by those platforms.
Wow. Now, you also talked in your book a little bit about dopamine in terms of screen usage and other things about that. Would you share a little bit about that? Because I found that fascinating in this context, especially.
Sure. Yeah. So dopamine is as a neurotransmitter. It's a chemical in the brain. It gets a lot of press these days because it's very clearly being exploited. What it is it's a foundation of our pleasure system in our brain. It's normal and good. When we feel something good, our brain says, "Oh, that feels good. Do that again." So we're rewarded for things that feel good, or that make us feel good. So you see a sunset over the beach. Wow, let's do that again. You spend a great time with your families. Just there's a lot of really great pleasures, and even you eat some ice cream. It's like, yeah, that feels good. That's a normal thing. What people have learned, though, what drug addicts, because it works exactly the same way. When something becomes addictive, what happens, one of the things that makes things addictive is that the dopamine cycle goes into overdrive, and our brain feels so much pleasure at certain things that it has to dial back the sensitivity to pleasure. So you get flooded with dopamine. So something comes up on a screen. It's this, there's this trigger factor that says, "Ooh, that's really exciting. That's really something." So your brain just goes into overdrive, and then the brain goes, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, that's too much pleasure." So it dials it back. So then what happens the next time is you have to have more of that pleasure to get the same sense, or more dopamine to get that same sense of pleasure, I should say. So it becomes this vicious cycle of trigger, feeling the pleasure. You take this action, you get this reward that happens, but you have to do it more. You have to go deeper and deeper and deeper. That's where addictions are formed. So you feel like you have to take longer and longer. So all kinds, most addictions work that way. And the companies that make our applications that are specifically addicting, like social media, video platforms, video games, they exploit that cycle to hook us.
So taking something that is normal, natural, in the way God has created us, and sort of tapping into that for their own means.
That's exactly right. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, it's bad.
Before we jump into some of the ways to sort of counteract it, one other phrase that jumped out at me as I was reading it is talking about the idea of like versus want. Would you elaborate on that and give some context to that?
Absolutely. So again, in the book, the whole arc is really about this idea that our desires, what we want, is being shaped. If you want to lead someone, you want them to do something, wouldn't it be convenient if you could just make them want to do that? If you could just flip a switch and cause them to want to do that? Well, that's what they're doing. We want to spend more time on our devices because they make us want to. Now, what happens is, what we hope in life is that you like what you want to do. That aligns up. I enjoy riding my bike, and I want to ride my bike, so I'm going to go do that. on the other hand, what happens in addictions is there's becomes this disparity between liking and wanting. Originally, you might start out doing something because you like it. Oh, this feels good. I think I'll do this again. Oh, that feels good. But then, unfortunately, when you feel compelled to do it, when you have to do it, you lose the joy in it, and you just want to. Then you're mindlessly scrolling Facebook for hours, and Instagram for hours and hours at a time. Why did I stay up till 2 a.m. scrolling Facebook or watching YouTube? Why didn't I turn off Netflix 3 hours ago? And I binge watched this thing again. So that happens. You wanted to do it, but you don't really like it because of the effect it has on you. And so it's not a joyful, it's not a good, positive thing. And so that misaligns. And a lot of times people, especially with significant addiction, people who are addicted, one of the worst things on screens people get addicted to is pornography. And so, oftentimes people that are addicted to pornography hate it while they're doing it. They feel compelled to do it, but they hate themselves. They hate that they're doing it, but they're compelled. So they want to, but they don't like it. And that happens with drug addicts. That happens with all kinds of addictions.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I'm like a recovering alcoholic, so I totally get the whole want, like, and so I totally get that very very vivid detail.
Yeah.
But what I found fascinating is that phrase came up, and as I was reading, it's like, I remember that, and then I thought, oh my word, I think about sometimes just checking email or just checking other things. It's like, where did that come from? Right. It's like, it's like a trigger. And it's like, oh my word. And so, it was really eye opening as I read it. And I'm like, okay, we need to take a step back here.
Right.
Well, first, this could be totally new information to people.
Sure.
So they could be going, it's not a big deal, or they're not aware of it, or maybe they even are. And they're like, okay, I know there are issues. I need to do something. What are a couple of things that we can do, whether it's in we'll just say in our lives or in the lives of our families, to sort of put those boundary hedges back up to sort of, as you say, reclaim our lives for that we can then serve God better and know Him more and be intentional. What are a couple of things we can do in that capacity?
Yeah, thank you. And that's really what the most of the book is about. You're right. It is hard because this might be new for people, and they might think, I don't really have that much of a problem, or I'm not as bad as other people, or everybody else is on their screen more than I am, and that happens. As you know, with addictions, that's called denial. So I've been there. I totally get it. Things that I would recommend, first of all, is to, if you're skeptical, just start getting educated about it. Try to understand the strategies. Look at what's happening. Understand that this is not an accident. There aren't 2.5 billion people on Facebook platforms or whatever it is now, because it's because we all wanted to, or because we all thought, just went into it. It's compelling. And we're not spending 6 to 12 hours a day consuming media because we wanted to be that when we grew up, like I said. So learn about it. There is, as like with most rabbit holes, you can go down the rabbit hole as deep as you want and learn the books and learn the studies and visit the addiction. There's actually addiction recovery centers for screen addiction. Learn about that. Watch some documentaries about that, what's really happening. Learn would be the first thing. And then secondly, what I encourage people, I guess it's different for individuals and parents. As an individual, what I encourage people to start with is by casting a vision for what their life could be if they weren't stuck in whatever's holding them back. So oftentimes you hear people say, gosh, I'm just so busy, but I just wish I could have done this and that. I wish I had time for, well, write that down. Make a plan for that. You are here. God made you for a purpose. God made you. There's things you can do that only you can do for the people in your lives and the people you're close to. And the world is missing out because you're not doing it. So that's where I would just, from that vision, then you can then set a framework of intentionality around taking the steps to make that happen. So, because it's not enough just to say, well, no, 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 stop doing this, stop doing that, unless you have a better yes to look forward to, something, some reason. Otherwise, why not just eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow, we die, right? It's not, we're here to serve God. We're here to be what he's made us to be. He's made us for way more than just just our own pleasure all the time. And so, because ultimately it's better for us. So it's better for us and his world. So, so for families, then it's this very similar, except you've got to bring your kids on board. You've got to help. Basically, you have to understand, and I share this when I speak about this to families, is that you have to decide whether you're going to raise your kids as if they're living in a theme park and their goal is to just be happy, or whether they're living in a battlefield and their goal is to be prepared to fight the battles and to help other people win. And as you look at the world around us, you realize the world is not a theme park. It's a battlefield. There's a battle for your kids' hearts and minds. And you have to understand that that's happening through their screens. And so with that foundation, you then cast a vision for your family and you decide, we're going to be different. Why are we different? Because we're here for something else. And the kids get on board with this vision that you cast, and you say, well, this is why we're here. So this is therefore why we're being very countercultural in our use of technology. We are going to not be like all your friends because you're here for something more. No, you're not going to be on Fortnite all night long. No, you're not going to have an iPhone when you're 12 or 10 or even 14 or even maybe 16 if you really want to be really super countercultural. So all that to say, yeah, it's all about that vision casting and that holding on to your mission so that you then have that motivation for doing what is extremely countercultural these days and what has to be if you're going to get your life back.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you have to have a better yes in order to, and you really do. You really have to see it as, God has so much more for me than I ever can imagine for myself.
That's right.
And so I need to, put, sort of drive that stake in the ground and say, okay, I'm going to take a step towards him, trust in him, put him first, and then start making those steps to change your life accordingly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the book is all about, ultimately, the book is like I said, it's a Christian book with Christian disciplines to then, once you've got that vision cast and you have that real sense of your God-given vision for your life, I lead people through this idea of really complete dependence and surrender to God through Christ in order to then figure out what needs to be removed from your life, what needs to be, how you need to renew your mind, what habits needs to be replaced, and then how do you pursue your purpose? All of that by God's power, because that's been my story. I didn't write a secular book because I don't have a secular story. I have, this had to be a Christian book for me, for my story. So anyway, that's the best thing of all, is that God has still got the power to help us overcome things, even in 2021, even when the most powerful technology companies the world's ever known has figured out how to get us all to do this. God is not surprised. He's not concerned. He can help us if we're willing to follow him.
Yeah, and that's really powerful, I think, and beautiful, because the Holy Spirit working in us, through us, taking every thought captive, renewing. But you're right, it is about submitting to God in everything, and that's
right.
And taking those steps, which is, that truly is, whether it is 2021, whether it was 1621, yep. Whether it was just 120, whatever it that is truly what it is. That's the life we're called to lead. That's right. Yeah, it turns out that everything that the scriptures teach us are still just as relevant, if not more relevant than they even were back in the day, because that we are seeing the unfolding and the application of things that people couldn't have imagined when they wrote it. When Paul talks about in the last days, people will become da 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 da. It's like, wow, we've never had more ways for people to become lovers of themselves and lovers of money and and all the things that are
media encourages us to be. So yeah, the scriptures are still have the answer. God is still on the throne, and still has what we need. If again, we do our part to play, we have our part. We have to walk with him and follow him in the process of finding our freedom in him.
Oh, absolutely. And then for those listening to this, if you have one key takeaway that you want to leave them with, like what is one thing you would encourage them to do today, what would that be?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess if I had to boil it down, I would have to say you need to decide to be more intentional with your life than the biggest corporations in the world. Who is going to decide for you who you're going to become? You need to be in charge. You need to take that responsibility, be the person who decides what you do with your life, what you do with your time, instead of just giving it away to the manipulation of those people who would exploit you.
It's that whole taking responsibility for yourself, accountability for yourself, and just saying, okay, I have to be responsible.
You do. It's what it really ultimately comes down to. If you surrender your ability to make choices, there's a lot of people who are very happy to make your choices for you, and unfortunately, that's what's happening. And so yeah, it's that intentionality and balance. So you just have to decide. That would be the decision. The one takeaway is just, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to decide. I am going to be more intentional with my life than anybody else.
That is true. Powerful. And I need that reminder like every day.
Yeah. That's why God made me write this. I think I needed to hear it. I need to hear it. So it's really important. We all need it. We all need it regularly. This is just a quick little side road, but
please. Yeah.
It's in the Deuteronomy 6 talks about when God gave the instructions to the newly freed Israelite slaves, he knew that they needed their minds renewed. So what he taught them was to do something, but do it every single day and do it constantly. Teach them, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. Is in that, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. You shall love him. And then you shall teach this diligently to your sons and daughters, and you shall talk of it when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. You shall bind it on your hands. You shall write it on your foreheads. You shall write it on your gates and on your walls, and on and on, right? So that's how do you do that? That's how you renew not only your own self, but a whole culture. Well, what has happened to us today? And what I say in my book is that Silicon Valley, Hollywood, Madison Avenue, they have learned to Deuteronomy 6 us. They're Deuteronomy 6ing us. Because what do most people do when they sit in their house and when they walk by the way and when they lie down and when they rise up? What's the first thing people check when they aren't even awake, or what's the last thing they do when they go to sleep? What are they doing when they're driving? What are they doing? On and on and on. It's a screen everywhere, right? Screens on our walls, screens. So it's uncomfortable parallel. But what the good news is that because that works, that model of Deuteronomy 6ing us works both directions. So that's bad news and good news. Again, the good news, coming back to my takeaway, is if you're intentional and you apply principles like Deuteronomy 6 to your life, like replacing all of those touch points of normal interactions with people, what we used to do before there were screens everywhere, right? That when people would actually talk to each other at the table in a restaurant instead of all being on a screen or whatever. So all those kind of things, but those are all applications of Deuteronomy 6. And so I would just definitely try to fit that in and understand that that's what's happening to us, but it also can be reapplied and taken in the positive direction again, if we're willing to do it.
No, I appreciate that. And that's a great image and a great action step, and that of what is happening to us, and yet what we then in turn can do to, as you say, become intentional. That's a great reminder. That's an action step for me. I know it is for our audience. If our listeners want to know more about you, about your book, where would you like them to go?
Yeah, thank you. The best place is my website, and I'm thatdougsmith.com. So Doug Smith's a very common name, of course. So I'm pretty much that Doug Smith. Oh, that Doug Smith, THAT, that Doug Smith, which can go both ways, right? Oh, you're that Doug Smith. Oh, no, you're that Doug Smith. Anyway, thatdougsmith.com. I'm on thatdougsmith.com. And while I'm not very active on social media for obvious reasons. I'm usually that Doug Smith on those places as well. But my website is probably the best place to get started, and you can find the book and so on is there as well.
Awesome. So thatdougsmith.com. So we're going to put that in the show notes as well as the book information. So if you're listening, check it out. It's a good read. I have to encourage you to do it. It's good stuff. So Doug, thank you so much for joining me today. This was just a gift, being able to chat and to really be able to have you share some of your story and really your calling to our audience. So I'm so thankful you joined me.
Oh, thank you, Eric. It's sure an honor to be with you. I really appreciate the opportunity and the chance to meet you and have this conversation. So thank you so much.
Wow. Great conversation with Doug. A couple of things really jumped out at me. First is decide if you're going to raise your kids as if they are living in a theme park and the goal is for them to be happy, or whether they're living in a battlefield and their goal is to be prepared to fight the battles and help other people win. I thought that was just a profound idea in the decisions we as parents need to make, not only in helping to guide and raise up our children, but in our own lives in terms of what kind of world are we really living in. Second, we need to remember the scriptures still have the answers. God is still on the throne, but we must continue to seek him and trust in him. He's at work, he's sovereign, but yet we need to continue resting in him. And third is to really decide to be more intentional with your life than the largest corporations in the world, right? So they have an agenda and they have a goal, but we need to make some decisions on our own in terms of how we want to make our life matter. So great conversation. Check out the show notes for more information. Go to thatdougsmith.com to learn more about Doug. If you found this episode helpful, please leave a review for us wherever you listen to podcasts. Doing so will help others to find us. Check out the show notes for resource information. We encourage you to do that for links and other references. We'd like to hear from you, so you can message us your questions or comments on Facebook, Instagram, at Entrusting the Faith. You can email us at info@entrustingthefaith.com. If you go to our website, which is www.entrustingthefaith.com, you can sign up to our email list and receive free resources as well as upcoming podcast episode information. So check it out. Lastly, just remember, legacies are built a day at a time. So start now.